أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. So in these first verses that were revealed to Prophet ﷺ, Allah Ta'ala describes himself as the one who gives knowledge to people, and that knowledge was what changed the world. That knowledge is still just as valuable. This is the thing that Muslims are forgetting today, that knowledge that was given to the Prophet, which changed the world, today has the same power to change the world. But today Muslims have forgotten that knowledge and they are pursuing Western knowledge as the solution to our problems. And for these reasons we are not getting. So we start by making dua to Allah for giving us knowledge. Allahumma anfa'ni bima 'allamtani wa 'allimni ma yanfa'ni warzuqni ilman tanfa'ni bihi. So now, today I am going to tell you of a puzzle to which I don't have any solution. I have some guesses, but I don't have any solution. The puzzle is this, that Keynes said that in order to explain what we see, we must reject this idea that the wage is set equal to the marginal disutility of labor. However, current labor economics texts are describing exactly the same theory that was rejected by Keynes, and they don't even mention Keynes. They don't even say that Keynes rejected it, but we have analyzed his arguments and we have overcome them. In fact, they don't have any answer to his arguments. They just bury them. So how is it that it's like somebody saying, look, there is an elephant in this room, and there's no elephant. But no, he insists that there is an elephant. And all the evidence, look, we can walk through this. No evidence, it makes no effect. And I will show you. So, this is George Borges, Harvard University, Labor Economics, 3rd edition, very popular book, textbook used all over the world. And so from the introduction he says that these are the policy issues that modern labor economics looks at. Why did the labor force participation of women rise steadily in the past century? What is the impact of immigration on wage and employment? Do minimum wages increase the unemployment rate of less skilled workers? There's a long list, but these are 3 questions that he examines. Now the thing is that because they are using a wrong theory, all the answers to all of these questions in this book are wrong. It's just mind-boggling, baffling. How can people believe in ridiculous things and continue to use them? So what I would like to say is economists don't understand the first thing about the labor market, because economists don't understand anything about human behavior. As we have already argued, human behavior is built on many things and it's not a utility maximization. And so the first thing is that people don't choose between labor and leisure. So in Borges, he says that, I think I have it quoted here. Yeah. People don't choose between labor and leisure. Labor market exists because people need money. Why do people work? It is not because they are making a choice between labor and leisure, and many people like the work they do. And so it's not a disutility which you have to overcome. In fact, people want to like the work they do because people's lives have meaning. This is something that's not part of economic theory. So you don't like to do a job which is meaningless. You want to believe, even if you are cleaning the bathroom, you want to believe that you are contributing to society. And so if you believe that you are contributing to society, then you say that, okay, this is something that has to be done. I am doing it. Like in masjid, when you have somebody who is cleaning the bathroom, he thinks he is performing worship. That is how people would like for all of their jobs. So there is no labor-leisure trade-off. So here is a here is a description of how they set up the theory, which probably most of you have gone through, that you have this labor-leisure trade-off and you have this budget constraint. It's just bogus. There is nothing to it. It's completely false. Vivian has 70 hours per week and her wage is $10 an hour, and she must decide whether to work, and once employed, how many hours to work. This is not true. When you get a job, the job has the number of hours you work. You don't decide how many hours you're going to work. So, this is the puzzle, that how can people make such blatantly false statements which fly in the face of observations and real-world realities and make this a theory. So there is nothing to this. This is completely false and bogus. So all of these curves and this backward bending supply of labor, this is all nonsense. This is good in the sense that it means that you don't have to understand those ridiculous equations, but it doesn't mean that, there's lots of other things that you need to do. You need to study what happens in labor markets. Then you will understand in real world labor markets. And there is a lot of work on that. ILO and many other people, they don't bother with these theories. They study the real world labor markets and they find things. And that's what you need to do in order to understand. So this is the motivation that is described for firms and laborers by Borjas. Workers are trying to sell their labor at highest price and firms are trying to buy labor at lowest price. This is completely false. I do hiring every day. I'm not looking for labor at the lowest possible price. I'm looking for good people to hire. And I don't mind paying them more. I would like to pay more to good people who are high quality. So, similarly, the laborer is not trying to sell his labor at the highest price. Normally, people are looking for jobs which are meaningful and satisfying. The person is looking for a job in his own field, and so that he can utilize his capabilities. And there's lots of work on the motivations of laborers and the motivations of firms. In one of those things that I showed you that I read, there was this description of some people who were, they took surveys of wine manufacturers in California, and they found that these people are not profit maximizers. They have different motivations. They're trying to serve the people and so on and so on. So, and this is generally true, that profit maximizing is not the goal of firms. So again, Borjas refers to the optimization principle. Every decision is motivated by desire to optimize. Again, empirical analysis shows that this is false. People don't optimize. There are many empirical evidence which shows that people make decisions without actually optimizing. And there are many reasons why. So, why people don't optimize? So you consider the choices that you are going to go into job, or you're going to study, go into a field. So are you going to optimize over whether you're going to take biology or chemistry or economics? You don't optimize because you don't know what will happen next. The future is not known. So the career that you choose depends on what you like to do, not on what is optimal to produce the income. Some people act like that, but most people don't. So also we don't know what the choices available are. Actually, the choices that we see are depending on what we see other people in our neighborhood doing. There could be many choices, like you could go to China to a university, but most of you will not not because it's not a good choice, but because nobody else around you is doing that. So we don't know the consequences of our choices. Most of our choices are shot in the dark. When you get married, you have no idea who the person that you are going to marry, what he is like and what she is like. So it's just you take a gamble. I mean, there's no optimization. So, as I said, there's a huge puzzle. Why do people put such ridiculous theories into books and teach them to students? So there are many reasons. I've explained why. Basically, the first principle of science was not understood by economists, that theories are made by looking at reality and then creating a theory which matches the reality. No, instead what they do is they follow Aristotelian method. You sit down in a corner of the room and you close your eyes and you think about what is true, and that is the ultimate truth. So they sit in their rooms and think about equations and charts and graphs, and that's how they make up theories. They never check them against the real world. Like Aristotle said that the heavy stone will fall faster than the light stone, but he never went to a mountain to drop 2 stones to see if that's true. If he had done so, he would have found that his theory is wrong. So, wrong methodology. One of the things which is very interesting is that the logical positivism said that if something is unobservable, then it doesn't exist. So one of the problems that arose was that how you feel is unobservable. So what are your motives? This is unobservable. Because this is unobservable, they say that we don't want to deal with that. So we'll just look at choices which are observable. So that way they basically blinded themselves to the real motivations of human beings. They are never discussed. How do real human beings live in this world? What are the things that motivate them? These things are not part of any economic theory. But if you want to do good economic theory, you can write the labor economics textbooks for the next generation. But you have to study hard to find out the real. So, Borgia says that in our story, therefore, he's setting up his labor theory. Workers will act in ways that maximize their well-being. Now, the problem is that Borgia doesn't know anything about what is well-being. So, the deepest sources of well-being are loving and being loved. Generosity is an important driver of long-run sustained happiness, giving to others instead of trying to take everything for yourself. Unselfish service to others makes one happy. Just imagine that on the one hand, you go and you have 10,000 rupees and you can use that to feed 100 children who are hungry, or you can use that to spend at Marriott and have yourself a delicious meal of the 4-star, 5-star. So, who will choose? It's obvious actually that everyone will choose to feed the children. And that will make him happy because a long time afterwards he will remember that and say that yes, I did something good, and he will think about how the children were made happy, and he will feel a warm glow in his heart that I was able to do such a thing. On the other hand, if you go and eat 10,000 meal, all you'll get is a stomachache and you will remember. So here is this diagram from Borges, the same diagram that was rejected by Keynes, and we will see there is so much evidence that this is simply not true, that there is a labor supply curve, and there is a labor demand curve, and there is equilibrium, and equilibrium occurs when supply equals demand. as we have said, nothing in this diagram is right. The labor demand is not like that because people are looking for good people with skills. They're not concerned with labor supply curve is not like that. So let's look at that diagram is the folly and myth of labor economists. What happens in the real world? Well, there was a race between Russia and USA to put the first man on the moon. NASA was hiring massively. Lots of people learned how to do physics and technology and engineering, and they got degrees. After the moon landing, the Americans clapped and said that, yes, we have won, and now we don't need the space program anymore. So there was massive firing of people. There were all these positions won, and the PhD physicists were driving taxis in New York. So even today, labor market is pretty bad. There are many people who are highly skilled, but they don't have any jobs, and so there's disequilibrium all over the place. That is what I'm saying. It's not that, say, English language PhDs can't get jobs, but why can't they get jobs? I mean, the theory says that the wage should decline until the equilibrium occurs, but it doesn't happen. I mean, we have all seen disequilibrium with our own eyes. So the thing is that we have to trust our own eyes and our own experience over stupid theories written by people who have no experience with reality. So Borjas is aware that these theories are no longer accepted by all. So he says that commonly heard criticism of marginal productivity of theory is that it bears little relation, actually no relation, to the way that employers actually make hiring decisions. This is exactly what I was saying. That when I hire somebody, I don't calculate what his marginal product of labor is and what is the wage. So the answer is that if employers did not behave this way, then the employers would not last long in the marketplace. This is just bogus. This is called the survival of the fittest argument. And it is not true. I mean, if you look at, you have biologists who have studied these evolutionary models. And so is it true that the firm which is out to try and maximize profits, that is the one that will survive? Actually, not necessarily. It depends on types of environment. There are many, there's now a clear theory that, individually selfish behavior can actually be correct in some environments, but if the environments are harsh where cooperation is necessary, then those people who learn to cooperate will survive and those who are selfish will not survive. So there is a lot of, this survival of the fittest argument, this is just meaningless words. You have to, if you want to make this argument, then you have to do a lot of work. You have to say, there are some firms who are maximizing, some firms who are not, and what will happen. And actually it turns out that in many different kinds of models, the survival of the fittest, the fittest are not the ones which are profit maximizing. The fittest are not the ones who use wages equals marginal product. And we see it every day. There are many people, I think one of my friends went to a firm, he was in the LUMS MBA program, and he was asked to advise some leather manufacturer in Karachi how to improve profits. So he examined the firm and he said that, look, you have too many employees here and you should get rid of some of them to improve profits. And no, I've grown up with these people. They're like family. I can't fire them. So, but he's still surviving. He has not been eliminated. So basically there's a law which is superior to the economics law, that if you take care of people and if you provide good service, then Allah Ta'ala will take care of you. So actually in the literature, this is a paper by Winters that I looked at. This survival of the fittest argument, it has been disputed and rejected long time ago. And in 1960s, Winters wrote a paper explaining that the survival of the fittest argument doesn't work. So then the mystery is, how come Borjas is writing in 2000 something and he just doesn't know about these arguments? What happened? I mean, this is so ridiculous. This is the puzzle, that how can you be so stupid that you don't read? It's easily available, the arguments. So one objection to survival, why don't firms maximize profits? Well, because firms have multiple goals. This is from the Winter article. There are managers are just they are getting salaries, they are not getting profits. It's the stockholders who are making profits from the firm. So the manager has a salary, so he doesn't care if the firm is maximized. As long as the firm is surviving, that is fine. And in fact, he wants to increase the survival. That may be a different goal. Even when you have, so this is multiple owners, this is called the agency problem and principal agent. And these theories show that firms don't maximize profits. Even if you have a single owner firm, a person is running his store, you have multiple objectives. You want to take care of your family. I mean, maybe that if you ran the store 24 hours, you would make the maximum profits, but you want to give some time to your family, and so you don't maximize, you do something which is satisfactory on both ends. Satisficing behavior is. So if you switch from maximization to satisficing, it has radically different implication. All the theory changes. None of those partial derivatives become operational, because you're not working at the maximum. And then a major problem is about maximization is that there is no information available. Actually, you see, when I run this university, I don't know the marginal product. And there is no marginal product, because actually we are not a profit-making firm. But even if there is a profit-making firm, there is too much lack of information. We don't know what's going to happen today, we don't know what's happening tomorrow, we don't know how much any particular person contributes to the value of the firm. So this is just not possible to do profit maximization in the real world. And nobody does it. I mean, people who have examined firms have found out that firms don't maximize profit. The firms don't set price equal to marginal cost. Actually, what the firms do is what is called markup pricing. You calculate roughly the cost it costs you to produce something. So if it's 100 rupees to produce 1 unit of something, then you add some profit margin like 20% or 50%, and you say, okay, it costs 100, I will sell it for 150. This is very sensible, logical, easy, but it is not price equals marginal cost. So we will discuss the problems with modeling later on, but there is a huge misunderstanding about models, which we need to understand. What is this model that Borjas is making, and he is saying this is the model? Basically, one very simple, one misunderstanding is that models are representations of reality. Actually, the reality is very complex. So basically, you see, you have reality. Reality is hidden, unseen, invisible, and unknown. And this is exactly where Kant, the philosopher, German philosopher, himself went astray and led the whole world astray in the West. And unfortunately, we are also influenced by this. So what he said was that the thing in itself, the hidden reality, is something we cannot access. But this is not true. I mean, basically, human motivations are thing in itself. So now to say that there is no way I can find out what your hidden motivation is, so I won't worry about it. This is wrong. I mean, even though I have no way of being 100% sure about anybody's motivation for anything, including myself, but I make guesses about it all the time, and I act on these guesses all the time. So the thing in itself is very important, even though it is unobservable. And not only is it unobservable, but not only do I make guesses, but some guesses are right, some are wrong, and I can assess this. So basically, what led them astray was this search for certainty. What they wanted was to be 100% sure. So you can't be 100% sure, but that's all right. We are never 100% sure of anything. We live in this world with uncertainty. So then, you see, because they said thing in itself doesn't matter, then they could make ridiculous assumptions like people maximize utilities, because this is you see, the model you have for reality doesn't matter. It doesn't have to match. The only thing which needs to match is the observations. This is what is the same theory as Friedman's as-if theory, that the model doesn't have to be true, only the observations from the model, only the predictions of the model have to be true. So this is not a correct understanding of models. Actually, what a model is a simplification of reality. Reality itself is very complex, and it generates the observations that we see. Now we try to think, how can some patterns that we see in the model be created by a model of reality? So we are trying to find in the model some simple, basically we want to simplify reality to produce the observations that we see. When we write down a model, then the implications of the model are already there. The deception is made. When I was trained, I was thinking that what a model is that we try to match real world elements and we create a model, then we find out the implications of the model. This is a wrong idea, because actually when we put down the model, we've already got all the implications. As soon as I put down profit maximization, etc., all the implications are built into these assumptions. So the question is how to choose the right set of assumptions. This is the thing, and we have a choice. We always have a choice. There is no. This is again something which, if you think that the models are sort of real, then you don't have a choice. Like Borjas doesn't think that he has a choice. He thinks that the model is the best possible and there is no other model. But if the model doesn't match the reality, then you should change the model. And you should try to find a model which can match the observations. If you find a model which matches the observations, then you can think that maybe this is a correct explanation. Maybe, that's always, because you never have. So the reality is that the model should match reality to some extent, and the extent to which it matches is how good the model is. But this is something you can never know, so that causes problems. That is why they have this completely stupid methodology, which makes completely bogus assumptions, and then because nobody can tell them that this assumption is not true, because the true reality is something which is not under consideration. Now, what about the mathematics? What about ABM? Well, the problem is that our mental capacities are limited. When we put down some elements, that okay, what we are going to have is a model in which there are many laborers of different types, and they have different motivations, and then there are many firms of different types with different types. Then if we put down all of these assumptions, then we cannot calculate the outcome because it's too complicated. So that's what a model that's what the computer allows you to do. You put down a complicated set of assumptions, and then you say, this is something you could do actually if by hand, but sometimes you can't. So if the model is complicated. So you allow the computer to tell you, well, under these assumptions, what will happen, and then you check to see whether the outcome matches reality. And if it matches reality, then you can think that I have a good model. So basically, complex interactions which take place, what is the result? This is basically, complexity theory, that if every person behaves in a simple way, but they have interactions with each other, then what will the group as a whole do? You can't calculate, because it requires a lot of difficult calculations. So you let the computer do it. So Friedman, what he was trying to say was actually somewhat true, that he said that, okay, you take a theory like people maximize utilities, or people set labor leisure choice. He said then firms maximize profits. All of these assumptions, you see, there were surveys done of firms, and all of these were rejected. Firms don't maximize profits, and laborers don't have leisure choice. So basically all of economic theory was under attack and had been rejected. So Friedman came up with this idea that the theories should not be tested, you should only test their implications. So if you have a theory, the theory implies itself. If you say that, so that's obviously not a correct understanding. Borja says that even if firms don't know what the marginal productivity is, they might set wage equal to marginal product, and if they don't, they will not survive in a competitive argument. So there are many different arguments that were made to counter the surveys which showed that firms don't know what the marginal product is, and don't know, they don't try to maximize profit. So even if they don't know, it might still be true. Like the argument that was given by Friedman is that if you take a billiard player, he doesn't know the laws of physics, but when he takes a shot, he acts as if he knows the laws of physics. So this argument again has been examined and refuted. It's not valid. To assume that the man knows physics is really a bad assumption. The man has habits and practices, and his behavior will be better explained by his own experience than by assuming that he knows physics. So the survival argument is false. The as if argument is also false. There is something to what Friedman was trying to say. Friedman was trying to say that if we model the unobservables in some way, the fact that the model doesn't match reality is not important. The implications, the match should be at the observations level. Now this is true in the sense that a model is a simplification of reality. All of the complexities of reality are not taken into account. So if it was true that maximizing utility model would lead to very accurate match at the observation level, then we would say, okay, people have many motives, but just assuming this is enough to give us a good match to observed behavior. If this was true, then Friedman's argument would be true. So the other motives don't seem to play a big role, because most of the observation can be explained by this. But it is not true. The observations are not explained by these theories. So basically the empirical evidence is against the labor theory. Nonetheless, these people keep publishing these same theories and arguing with these same ideas. So the empirical observation shows that the firm don't set wage equal to marginal product. Firms don't have sufficient information to maximize profits. Survival of the fittest does not eliminate the worst firms. They are in the Korean crisis. There were lots of firms that collapsed. But basically the collapse occurred for firms which took on too much debt, because suddenly, without knowledge of anybody, the currency collapsed, and so foreign debt became too expensive, so firms collapsed. But firms were very good, the workers were competent, firms were working efficiently. The problem arose because the financial officer decided that it was safe to take a loan, which it was not. So it is not that the firm was inefficient. And so this is not true that only the firms which maximize profits will survive.
So I have a question. If even people fire them based on the current need, in future the need, if they won't find people.
Yeah.
That is somehow.
Yeah, basically there is complexity, there is lack of information. Firms don't know their marginal cost, they don't know what's going to happen in the future. So this kind of idea that basically the theory of the firm in the standard economics is based on knowing everything that will happen until infinity. So that's simply wrong. So the theory of the firm, which is currently taught in all micro textbooks, is just an idea. People just sat at their desks and made it up. They never actually studied even one firm. So there's an article by Barbara Bergman called "Needed a New Empiricism." She says that, biologists, they wanted to describe dolphin behavior, so they looked at dolphin behavior for thousands of hours. But economists, they haven't even looked at a single firm to see if firms match their theories. The theory of firm is just made up without any observations. This is the lack of scientific methodology. Alright, so I said that there are 10 questions, of which one of the questions which is very important is, and this is very robust. No matter how you set up your supply and demand curve, if you set up a minimum wage above the equilibrium, there will be unemployment. So Stigler said that economists should be outspoken and singularly agreed that increases in minimum wage reduce employment. So this is ideology now, that you must believe this, you must preach this. That's what I was speaking. And you must. So the reasoning is very simple. You are all familiar with this reasoning. If the minimum wage is above equilibrium, there will be excess supply of labor. People will come in and will offer their services for less. And since the employer is trying to hire laborer at the minimum cost, he will accept. Now the fact is, this simply doesn't happen. When we have advertised for positions for naib qasids, which anybody can fulfill, there is no requirement. So we get 1,000 people. That's happened actually in Islamic University a few years ago for 2 or 3 or 4 positions. And none of them said that, okay, you're offering 12,000, so I will work for 11,000. And if somebody had said that I will come in and work for 11,000, he wouldn't have been accepted. So this mechanism doesn't work. So you have excess supply of labor. But even though this doesn't work in reality, economists believe it. 90% of professional economists agree that higher minimum wage reduces unemployment. Now, the fact is that people who actually went out and looked in the world found that this is not true. And these studies were done in the 90s. So Borges is aware that this is not true. So he is writing, and the whole theory is explaining why minimum wage increases. Then he looks at case studies, and he says that a number of recent case studies conclude that recent increases in minimum wage have not had any adverse. So he is familiar with the studies. Studies have been done by competent economists who looked at the real world instead of looking at their theories. So there was a very interesting, specially designed study of 400 restaurants in New Jersey and eastern Pennsylvania. Now what happened was that, this was in the 90s sometime, both states, these are bordering states, so they are next to each other. So all other conditions are quite similar, and they are part of one country. One can move from one side to the other side. There's not much geographically they are the same. Now what happened was that the New Jersey increased its minimum wage from something like $3.35 an hour to $4.05 an hour. But Eastern Pennsylvania did not. So now the obvious and strong prediction of economic theory is that New Jersey would have higher unemployment and Pennsylvania would have. So Pennsylvania minimum wage was not changed, but actually in New Jersey the employment increased with the increase in minimum wage. So the empirical evidence proves that economic theory is wrong. The theory.
Could it be because of the bargaining powers? Maybe in that particular state the unions were so strong that...
No, this is actually McDonald's restaurants, and there were no unions.
So then it may be that their wages may be already above the minimum wage, that's why the unemployment...
But these two are the places, Eastern Pennsylvania and New Jersey are right next to each other. And the same population is around. Actually, there were many people, because this observation, this Card and Kruger study, the myth and measurement, I'll refer to that book, because this strikes at the heart of economic theory. There were many people who tried to rebut this, and they thought of all possible explanations, and none of them could succeed. It's not that this was just some isolated study. Lots of people tried to find explanation which would make economic theory work. And so, after examining all possible explanations, Borges says that we don't understand why evidence soundly rejects supply and demand theory. And then he says, needless to say, if this is correct, obviously it can't be correct, this line of research raises important questions about why labor economists think about how labor is. So he says that if this is true, then this research is true, then our understanding of the labor market is not correct. We don't fully understand why this is so. But and why the implications of are simple and sensible. He is still defending his theory that our theory is very simple and it's very sensible. So if it's contradicted by the data, is soundly rejected by the data, still we will stick to our theory. We will not look at the data. So then he goes, what are the possible reasons? So this is like Khalid Mahmood, he's also an economist. So he says, well, maybe there are errors in the data, maybe there are errors in estimation, maybe there are errors in the sample of restaurant chosen. Now the thing is that all of these are possibilities, but they apply in the same way across the border. That is, in Pennsylvania you have the same errors in data, and you have the same errors in data in the New Jersey. So similarly, somebody finally came up in his reference. One person went and hand-picked a sample of firms and showed that no, unemployment increased in these firms. So it was actually just one chain in New Jersey, which was So he said that, look, Card and Kruger say that increasing minimum wage doesn't have adverse effect on employment, but in these firms he shows that it does. Then so Card and Kruger re-examined this data and they said that no. First of all, if you look at the full sample, this is not true. If you look at the special sample, even then there was one or two outliers, and these outliers were driving the result. And basically it seemed quite clear that the person had chosen the sample in order to make his result come out. And in fact they write that if somebody contacts a restaurant and says that, and the restaurants are against minimum wage, so he says that he tries to find out, are there any restaurants that have had reductions that have reduced employment? So he will find one among the many. So there was many other ridiculous special arguments to show why Card and Kruger are wrong, and Card and Kruger rebutted these arguments. They showed that there is no empirical evidence against their results. So how did Borjas respond when he finds that his theory is soundly rejected by reality? He says the data must be wrong. The theory cannot be wrong. This is what he is saying. This is the attitude this is not the first time. Keynes started this and he rejected the theory. And then, since then, over the 50 years, many people have come and many people have presented strong empirical evidence that the wage equals marginal product is not true. The firms don't do marginal cost pricing, which is the essential requirement for profit maximization, and lots of empirical evidence. But the economists stubbornly stick to their theories in face of overwhelming empirical evidence to the contrary. They just have this idea that the theory must be true, regardless of what the data says. And this is true for 100 years now. That is, Keynes rejected so I don't think there's any chance that they will learn. So the thing is that you will have to develop the new labor theory, which we will be using in Islamic countries, not in Europe, because I don't think they will ever understand. So basically it goes back to Aristotle. He did not believe in experiments or observations. He believed in thinking. And so all of this Greek philosophy, there's these Zeno's paradoxes of motion, that if you have two people and one person is ahead 100 feet of the other and they both move, then the person behind can never overtake the first one. Well, now we know that this can happen. So that is the reality. But in mentally, he says that, look, what will happen? There will be a time at which the first person covers half the distance to the old person, to the person in front. But while he is covering half distance, the other person has also moved forward. So now there is more. So now again we repeat this. Then again he can only cover half the distance, and the other person has still moved forward. So this process will keep on going infinitely. So he will never overtake. Now this is exactly the labor economist idea, that I have this theory, and even if I see that, look at two persons and the one person overtakes the other one, we see that sometimes the faster racer will overcome the. So you don't believe what you see, you just believe your theory. So you see, this idea of Aristotle, this was picked up by Descartes. See, when the Europeans got science from Muslims, they just got the books. This is the problem. They didn't get the teachers. So they never understood what was written in those books. So Francis Bacon, who was known as the father of science, he came up with this. They understood that, you see, the Europeans understood that Muslims are doing something which is different from what the Greeks did, and what they are doing is they are looking at the world. So Francis Bacon said that basically science is about induction. What is induction? Induction means that you look at the reality. This is very different from what economists do. They don't look at reality. But Francis Bacon said that you look at reality and you search for patterns in this reality. So, for example, if you see that somebody takes aspirin and it cures the headache, and this pattern repeats a lot, then this is science. No, actually this is wrong. This is not science. This is just pattern fitting. This is one part of science. The fact is that when you see such a pattern, then this points to something in reality which is causing this to happen. So there must be some chemical and some physiology of the body which is hidden. And so basically the induction leads to patterns, and we see what modern econometrics is based on the Baconian idea. It says that take two series, and if they are correlated, then they will stay correlated. Now this is completely ridiculous. What the truth is that if two series are correlated, you have to understand what is it in reality that leads to this correlation. This is looking for the hidden reality. So if you find that FDI is correlated with GNP, then you look at what was the NFI actually, what did they do, and how did it contribute to growth. Just like that, if you find a pattern that aspirin cures headaches, then you look for chemicals, you look for how aspirin is digested in the stomach, where it goes, and basically you find that the aspirin dilates some blood vessels, which if they are tight. So that's the explanation. Now Bacon did not understand this. He just understood that you look for patterns. But even that little advance that you should start looking was reversed by later people. So both Descartes said that I think, therefore I am. This is a logical argument. So just think about this. That my experience reality, I exist. I don't need to logic. I don't need. I can feel my blood in my veins. I can feel that I am alive, and so I don't need to create an argument. Now, if somebody says that I close my eyes to all reality and I will only use logic, then you can come up with such an argument that I am thinking, so since I am thinking, who is it that is thinking? So there is somebody who is thinking, so therefore I exist. But if somebody needs to use this argument to prove that he exists, then he is in very bad shape. So Descartes created the analytic method. Think through to certainties. So this is what Borjas does. He thinks through to certainties and then use logic to deduce. And then when you find a baby who cannot think, you say, oh, this baby doesn't exist because it can't think. So 500 years Europeans have been trying to figure out what is this thing called science, and they have not been successful as yet. So science is based on empirical evidence, but it is not all about empirical. You see, Bacon's mistake, Bacon's blunder we might say, is to think that science is only about empirical experience. Science is not about empirical experience. Science uses empirical experience to deduce the hidden reality behind that. It's a complicated thing. So Ibn al-Haytham criticized the Greek science. He said that, Ptolemy starts out with this fixed idea that circles are perfect and stars are heavenly bodies, so stars are also perfect. So stars must follow a circular motion. And then if there is some problem with the circular motion, then he introduces more circles, circles upon circles, epicycles. But he cannot give up the idea that stars don't follow circles. So Ibn al-Haytham criticized that just because I think that stars follow circles, It doesn't force the stars to follow circles. Similarly, Borjas doesn't understand that my idea about how labor behaves does not force the laborers to behave in that way. He's following exactly the same mistake. And this is not Borjas, this is all texts in labor economists, all modern economic theorists. They are stuck with the idea that my theories, which I write a consumer theory, I have never observed a single consumer. I write a theory of the firm. I have never observed a single firm. I write a theory of equilibrium. I have never observed equilibrium in real life. And yet, this theory is stronger than anything I observe. This is just ridiculous, but this is what modern economic theory is. So, coming back to Card and Kruger, they carried out a very careful experiment. Card and Kruger were orthodox economists. They are not, outsiders. They are very well known, famous, and they actually were themselves surprised. They were carrying out this in order to prove that it is true that increasing in minimum wage would lead to increase in unemployment. But their results, they looked at the data, and the data says no. So they found that higher minimum wage leads to higher employment. Within New Jersey, employment growth was higher at restaurants that were forced to increase their wages. Now, you see, they're looking at more detailed evidence. Okay, you look at New Jersey. These are fast food chains like McDonald's, and so some of the firms were paying high wages, and some of them were paying low wages. So the ones that were paying low wages, they had to adjust their wage. They had to increase their wage to match the new minimum wage. So now they found that at those restaurants which had to increase more, the employment increased more. Again, exactly opposite of the prediction of economic theory. Then they started looking for other evidence. So they said, okay, they found that in fast food restaurants in Texas, after 1991 increase in federal minimum wage, they found that the employment increased after the minimum wage increased. And similarly, in 1988, there was an increase in California minimum wage. Again, employment increased, contrary to the theory. This is exactly what Keynes said. Keynes said that we have to drop this axiom that the wage is equal to the marginal distributivity of labor, and he provided a lot of empirical evidence to show that this theory is not right. And one of these is, of course, the fact that laborers don't respond symmetrically to cuts in nominal wage and to increases in inflation. This is an obvious evidence that it's not the real wage that they are setting equal to marginal distributivity of labor. And after that, he says that economists are like Euclidean geometers who, when they come into a non-Euclidean world where the axioms don't hold, they just rebuke the lines that why aren't you keeping straight? You should follow our axioms instead of adjusting their theory. So he said that we have to remake the theory without this assumption. This is the sensible thing to do. Unfortunately, for 1 century, labor economists haven't figured out the sensible thing to do. So these are the results by Card and Kruger, and we'll show. So basically, there was the increase in federal minimum wage from $3.35 to $3.80 on April 1st, 1990, and then 1 year later it was increased to $4.25 in 1991. So if the states already had high wages, then there would be no effect on them. And in low wage states, you should have increased unemployment according to the theory. But they found that the reverse was true, exactly the opposite. They calculated how many workers are affected by this minimum wage. So the places where, if a state has already got a lot of wages, then there will be only a few people who will get the benefit from the minimum wage. So they found that in the states in which there was the largest fraction of workers affected by minimum wage, they had the largest gains in teenage employment. The more the minimum wage was increased, the more the employment was increased. Exactly the opposite of the supply and demand prediction. So then they went and they looked at previous studies which had shown that increase in minimum wage increases unemployment. And they just re-estimated the same studies with the current data, and they found that there was no effect. So all of the previous empirical evidence also is wrong. There was no evidence for decrease employment in face of minimum wage. Then they have this whole book, and I'm summarizing this book here, of the empirical evidence against minimum wage, against the supply and demand theory actually. So now in many states, you had every restaurant is setting its own wage, so it varies. Some is $2, some $2.50, some $2.25, and so on. So when the minimum wage went into effect, all of the wages below now come to exactly the same value. Now, how can wage equal marginal product of labor in that case? Similarly, you see, if the laborers are doing labor leisure choice, then if their wage is increased, they should reduce the amount of labor they are offering. None of this happened. Furthermore, something which we can understand intuitively because we understand the real world. Suppose the minimum wage is $4.05. Suppose that somebody is making $5 an hour, which was half. And everybody else was making $2.50. You have these people who are there's a hierarchy. There are these people who are flipping the burgers, and then there are managers, and there are supervisors, and so on. So now, when the minimum wage went to $4.05, then these people, the burger flippers, the sort of the least skilled worker, now are earning $4.05. So what do you think will happen to that $5 supervisor? Their wages were increased. They will be unhappy because if they are supervisors, and they should have some differential, some additional. So that's what happened. Wages near minimum were readjusted upwards. Again, what happened to the marginal productivity? If they were being paid marginal product, then they would not be. One firm could not readjust the wage upward. And some people argued, as I said, that this is really an attack at the heart of microeconomic theory. So people looked for a lot of explanations, could not find any, like unions, etc., etc. One was that, okay, the wages were increased, but the fringe benefits were decreased, so that the real wage. So this didn't happen, no reduction. Furthermore, there were some in the law, because the economists were there, they said, okay, let's something that will happen according to their prediction. You see, if the costs go up and the firm is in long run zero profit equilibrium, firm will collapse. Firm will go out of business. So the firm said that, okay, there's a distress clause in that law, that if the firm is really in distress, then they can continue to pay lower wages below minimum wage. They just have to explain. I mean, there's some procedure to. So nobody used that. Nobody used this provision to pay sub-minimum wage. There was a decrease in wage dispersion. That is the previously, before the minimum wage law, there was a standard deviation of wage was very high, but after that, they all became much more closer to each other. There was also benefits to the poor. The major argument that is made for minimum wages is that the poorest people are the ones who are working at minimum wage, so they will benefit if we increase the minimum wage. These are non-economists, because according to economists, if we increase the minimum wage, then a few people of the poor will get more, but more will become unemployed, and if you look at the total benefits, it will reduce. But this doesn't happen in the real world. However, if you look at how much this affects the poor, you find that the effect on the poor is there, but not very strong, for two reasons. Because actually, if you look at the poverty line, then you find that many people fairly above poverty line are still working for minimum wages. And the other reason is that many of the people who are really poor, they don't have any connection with the labor market. So you don't have. So this is not, Card and Kruger say, this is not your best measure for attacking poverty. It helps, but it is not very effective. So again, 6th chapter. These are all chapter by chapter. I'm going through the Card and Kruger book, which provides evidence against the supply and demand model for labor. He says that, okay, in conventional theory, firms would operate with zero profits in the long run, and if you increase their wage costs, some of them would be driven to bankruptcy. This, of course, did not happen. There was about a small loss in profits. There are three ways that you can make up for cost. You can increase your prices depending on the elasticity of demand for your product. You can reduce your profits, or you can increase your efficiency. So you can make do with, and if you have if you're paying more, then you can get more work out of the laborer. So all three of these things happened. There was a minor decrease in profits, there was a slight increase in prices, and there was a slight increase in efficiency, and the firms continued to operate. So again, the evidence does not correspond with the neoclassical theory of the firm. All of this business of long run average cost and long run margin cost, this is just myth. In fact, that's the title of the book, Myth and Measurement. That all of these theories of the firm that you have studied, SRMPC and LRMPC, all of this is just ridiculous nonsense. So, Card and Kruger conclude in their last chapter that taken as a whole, our findings pose a serious challenge to the simple textbook theory that economists have used to describe the effect of minimum wage. And this provides us with an opportunity to develop and test alternative theories. Okay, then what happened when Card and Kruger published this book, which was very solidly documented empirical evidence? People tried to rebut this. People tried to find out explanations for why this is wrong, but they couldn't. So, the Card says that there's an interview by Card which I'm going through, in which he says what happened after he published this book. So first of all, he says that our findings reject two basic implications of supply and demand. That if you have a small firm and if you raise the wage slightly above the equilibrium, then everybody will come to your store. He says this is not true. He says that many firms had policy. They could not find workers at the given wage, at the equilibrium wage, even slightly above. They were offering, they said that if you go and bring a friend in to work for us, we will pay you a bonus of $100. So they are trying to find people and willing to pay more. So obviously there is unfulfilled demand at the equilibrium wage. So this is not possible, not compatible with equilibrium. According to the supply and demand theory, firms do not have any power in setting wages. The wage is set by the equilibrium level. If they increase the wage above that, everybody will come to their store. If they decrease below, everybody will leave. Obviously, this is not true. We all know that this is not true. So, according to classical theory, there is no such thing as a vacancy, because in equilibrium all vacancies will be filled. But many low-wage employers had vacancies for months, and they had policy that bring in a friend who works for a week, you get $100 bonus. Now, according to the theory, if you have vacancies, what you should do is raise your wage. But they didn't. Why not? Well, there are many possible explanations. One of them is that firms have monopsony power. They are sole hirer in their neighborhood. So in that case, they wouldn't set wage. See, what happens in a monopsony is that suppose you increase the wage by 10 cents. That would be a good thing to get the new laborer, but you have to pay the same price to all of your workers, which makes it an expensive policy. So that's why if you have monopsony power, then you cannot easily raise the wage. So firms can set wages, and because of this, the theory of the firm, even a small, basically the fast food chain, this is sort of ideal for competitive market. You have small firms which are all identical. They are hiring unskilled labor, so there is no issue of having education. Everybody is the same. All the labor is the same. They all do the same kind of thing, and they are interchangeable. So you have all of the assumptions of competitive markets are satisfied, but none of the implications of competitive market. So what happened to Card and Kruger as a result? This is very important. This is in the interview. They said that I have stayed away. I stopped doing research in this area. Why? Because it cost me a lot of friends. People I had known for many years, some of the ones I first met at my job, became very angry with me. They thought that in publishing our work, we were being traitors to the cause of economics. So this clearly shows that economics is an ideology. It's not a theory about the real world. It is something you believe with the eyes closed. And even if the whole world says otherwise, it's like, we believe in God, and this is regardless of, even if empirical evidence suggests otherwise, we still believe in God. So this is like that. This is their belief. It is their faith. No matter how much empirical evidence comes in, you will not reject your faith. And if anybody rejects, then he is a traitor to your ideology. So there is no hope for understanding in the West. Keynes pointed out failure of supply and demand, and since then many people have explained that the theory of firm, which has been developed by Hicks and Samuelson, this theory is wrong. There are many reasons why it is wrong. So Keynes' theories were suppressed and ignored. Card and Kruger, same thing. It has been suppressed and ignored. We just saw this text, Borjas, he mentions the Card and Kruger findings and says, they must be wrong for some reason. I don't know what the reason is, but our theory can't be wrong. So, maybe the data is wrong, maybe this is wrong, maybe that is wrong, maybe something, but the data, we won't accept this data. So, many others, this is Card and Kruger is the strongest study, but there are many studies which document that the theory of supply and demand labor market is wrong. So for a century, they have not been able to understand how the labor market works, because they are fixed, committed to their ideology, which they will not reject regardless of what the empirical evidence says. And just like that, for more than 5 centuries, they have not been able to understand Islamic science. So, what is the alternative? Well, Card and Kruger provide an alternative. He says that, people search for jobs, they don't have information about what jobs are available, and people are not interchangeable. Firms are searching for laborers are searching for jobs. So there is a wide range of variation in wages. When there's a match, it takes place. A laborer who's searching and a firm who's searching, if there's a match, but the matching wage can be anything. It can be quite variable. So wide range of variation is possible, and it is observed. So we have basically the Great Depression of 1929. That is what generated empirical data, which forced Keynes to rethink. Actually, before the Great Depression, Keynes was also a standard neoclassical economist, and he also said actually that now we are in a period of prosperity and it will last forever. So when the Great Depression came out, he was forced to rethink. So the same thing happened. Actually, the Lucas, who is one of the people very responsible for putting back the theory of employment. Basically, what Keynes said is that we observe involuntary unemployment. People are unemployed. They would like to find jobs at the current going wage, equilibrium wage, but they can't. And this is incompatible with supply and demand theory of labor. Everybody who wants to find a job should be able to find a job. So basically, Lucas was very important in rejecting Keynes, and he again went back to the theory that there is no involuntary unemployment. He said that everybody who wants to find a job can find a job, and the person who is unemployed only because he chooses not to work. So some people who were criticizing Lucas said that Lucas says that the Great Depression was the Great Vacation, where suddenly a lot of people decided to take time off for their jobs to enjoy their leisure. This is what the theory says. So just like the Keynes evidence, so the global financial crisis which took place in 2008 had the same effects, and it shows the same properties of the labor market. There was this is a book by Mia and Sufi, House of Debt, in which he describes that there is a small town in Indiana, Wakarusa, Napani and Elkhart, Indian names, in which there was this company called the Monaco Coach Corporation. They were building recreational vehicles. So these are vehicles which have whole houses attached to them, and you can go and live have vacations in them. So suddenly in 2008, the sales collapsed by 30%. Again, disequilibrium. Now remember that the question you see when such a sudden change happens is that, was it equilibrium before or was it equilibrium after? Both can't be true. Now, if you remember one of the books, the Micro Varian, he says that we are only concerned with equilibrium. We don't care what happens out of equilibrium. So this is ridiculous. Again, a refusal to open your eyes to reality. You think inside your heads that, okay, equilibrium holds, and then you stick with that regardless of what happens in the real world. So when the sales fell by 30%, Then they had about 3,000 workers. They let go about half of those workers. They didn't have enough. They were not even producing enough. So the Great American Recession, which is what happened after the global financial crisis, swept away 8 million jobs. More than 4 million homes were foreclosed. So according to the supply and demand theory, the wages should have declined, but actually they didn't. Keynes was continuously trying to tell the economists that, look, your theories aren't right. So he's criticized his fellow economists for being unmoved by the lack of correspondence between the results of their theory and the facts of observation. So he said that results of my theory and facts of observation, even if they are in conflict, the economists won't budge from their theories. So the Keynesian theories of aggregate demand is one of the elements which goes against the neoclassical theory. So this is some evidence from Mia and Sufi. Again, this evidence contradicts the standard supply and demand theory. Basically, Keynes said that the driver of employment is aggregate demand. It is not the supply and demand equilibrium. If the aggregate demand is low, then there will be unemployment. And basically, that's what happened in the global financial crisis, and also in the incomes collapsed, so the demand for products collapsed, and when the demand collapsed, then the laborers were fired. And the theory says that when the labor becomes cheap, then the cost of production become low, so you'll be able to produce goods at cheaper, and so that will go back to the demand. So things will go back to equilibrium where you were. Now the thing is very important to notice that both before the Great Depression and both after and both before 2008, there was a functioning economy with very high jobs. All factories were working and everybody was making money and people had jobs. And so this was an equilibrium. And then suddenly, people were out of work, factories were closed, and incomes were less. So the question is, which is the equilibrium? And why? This is a serious question. Why can't you go from the unemployment equilibrium to the employment equilibrium? It took 20 years in the US for recovery. Actually, recovery never actually happened. It was the World War II which suddenly exogenously increased aggregate demand, which led to the recovery from recession. And similarly, we have same problem today. The Great Recession is still continuing. There's large unemployment hidden because employment becomes hidden because the way you calculate aggregate unemployment is that you look at the number of people who are looking for a job, and then you find how many people are employed. So now there is something which is called the discouraged worker. If somebody keeps looking for a job and then he doesn't find, he says that, okay, I'm no longer looking for a job. So when the worker becomes discouraged, then he drops out of the labor force, and then is not part of the unemployment statistics. So if a lot of discouraged laborers, then your unemployment statistic doesn't actually reflect the true story. So what Mia and Sufi show is that the auto manufacturing industry sells all over the USA, so their aggregate demand is determined by aggregate demand all over USA. On the other hand, if you have a state, so some states were affected by the property bubble and others were not. This is the key to understanding. Basically science is about looking at differential effects. So in some places, just like the minimum wage, you see if you have one place has a minimum wage increase and other doesn't, then you can compare the effects. So here Some states had a huge property bubble. So when the bubble collapsed in 2008, there was a huge loss of aggregate demand because the income was not there. So what Mia and Sufi show is that there were auto dealerships. Dealerships are the place where you have the showroom and you sell the car. So he said in the states in which there was no property bubble, there was no change in employment in the dealerships because the local income was the same. But in the same state, actually, in the same place where there was a dealership and there was an auto manufacturing plant, there was job loss in the auto manufacturing plant because the aggregate demand nationwide collapsed. And similarly, in states where you had a property bubble collapse, then you had job loss in dealerships and in auto manufacturing. So it shows clearly the effect of aggregate demand, and this is not according to supply and demand, because people should be able to shift jobs, and so you can't have job loss in one industry and not have in the other, because the unemployment rate is the same because of equilibrium. But of course, equilibrium doesn't happen. This is just a picture from Mia and Sufi, which explains exactly what I've said. There are some non-tradable jobs. The dealership is a non-tradable job. That is, you sell to your neighborhood. It's a service. And tradable jobs are those where you're selling to the whole nation. So he says that in counties in which there was a huge property bubble, there was a huge decline in non-tradable jobs, but not so much in small net worth decline countries. That is, the net worth of property didn't decline very much. So then the local aggregate demand remained the same. So the demand for services which are non-tradable, services are haircuts, etc., which you can only deliver in your neighborhood. But auto manufacturing you supply to the whole nation. In tradable jobs, the same pattern were true for all over the place. So this differential job loss is not according to the supply and demand. So there are frictions in the labor market. This is also what was said by Keynes. Wages don't go down. When after the 2008 and similar data for Great Depression, there was a spike in the number of people receiving the same wage. Why? Because basically the firms wanted to cut the nominal wage to keep their costs low, but they couldn't because that would reduce laborer morale. That would cause. So, in the hardest hit areas, when you're really disaster, then there is some evidence, and people, they are reasonable. They say that okay, things are very bad. Okay, so we will take a cut in nominal wage so that the firm can survive. But normally, that's not the case. The other thing is that the people don't move. So there was these 1,500 people who became unemployed in these small cities, and what he says, what Mian Sufi says, 3 years later, they were all still there and they were all still unemployed. So they didn't go out to find jobs so there was differential unemployment. In the hardest hit countries, the counties, the unemployment ranged from 5% to 13%. So the labor market is not equilibrating, people moving to the place where there are jobs. So in California Central Valley, 50,000 workers lost their jobs. Unemployment was at 20%, huge. But people didn't move out. Population actually grew in these counties from 2007 to 2009. So again, the labor market doesn't behave in the way that the new classical theory says that it should. So Mian Sufi says that there does not exist a satisfactory explanation of why unemployment exists. Basically, all of this NAIRU, non-accelerating rate of employment, this Phillips curve, all of this business is all about trying to show that there is a natural rate of unemployment and you can't do anything about it. And this is simply, and there's no involuntary. But this is, there's strong evidence that there is involuntary unemployment. So, Keynes did explain why unemployment exists by throwing out the theory of the labor market. Now, if you say that no, the theory of labor market is true, and now you want to explain why unemployment exists, then you can't do it. So, that's the end of today's lecture.